So we're just kind of hanging out for a few minutes as people gather. And again, there's a power outage locally, so we're kind of keeping our fingers crossed.
You mean locally on campus or?
Yeah, the slow campus is down and they're sending everyone home.
I remember those days.
Okay.
I thought wasn't the bond measure supposed to take care of all that?
That's way above my pay grade to answer, Bruce. I don't know.
I have a question about actually ordering the ticket for the event.
Yes.
I noticed that they don't. I mean, I know that the CPAC has a limited capacity, and so I'm kind of surprised that they don't give you a selection of whether you want to attend in person or virtually, because it seemed like I would attend virtually, but why would I buy a ticket that would take a seat that would go to somebody who actually wants to be there in person? Seems like
Right. I know that's complicated and I can't answer that completely. Karina would be able to do that, but your ticket does allow you to do either.
I know that, but I'm
Uh-huh.
assuming that there's a limit on, they're not going to sell more tickets than there's capacity.
No.
So
And
this way you could sell many more tickets if you knew who was going to,
right,
who had
right,
no intention of being there.
right. I'm not sure their current vendor has that sophistication. So yeah, we'll just see. And I also think they're not going to sell 400. They're not going to fill 400 seats. So it's going to be a little more spaced out so that there's some spacing, social distancing, that kind of thing. So, hi,
Okay,
Julie.
just had to ask.
So what do you think, Anne?
We can get going. What do you all think? That time?
Sure.
Okay.
Let me just introduce Anne and give a couple plugs and answer those kind of ticketing questions. I'm Denise from the SLO Campus Library, where there's a power outage today. So we don't know if people will come and go and join us or get, kicked off. Anyway, thanks for coming. And we're really glad to have you here with our host, Anne Jensen. We're going to kind of finish up and explore some of the themes that we started with for part one of this discussion. And again, if we've got other events coming up, we've got a couple things tomorrow, or something tomorrow and something on Friday. And I think towards the end, I'll do a screen share and go to that library events page. We still have tickets for sale for the author event on the 21st of April. And as Bruce was saying, you have your choice. When you buy your ticket, you can either watch the simulcast or you can go in person on campus. So you have that choice. And I understand it will also be recorded and then available on YouTube for a 30-day period. So there's a few choices that you have. So, okay, well, I'm going to turn it over to Anne and we'll get going. Thank you.
And thank you. And I wanted to begin with an acknowledgement about the land. So Cuesta College does acknowledge that our campuses occupy the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Salinan tribe, also known as the Tapota'al, or people of the Oaks. We acknowledge that Californian natives and indigenous peoples across the U.S. have been subjected to settler colonialism in the forms of slavery, genocide, mismanagement of natural resources, and forced removal, particularly but not exclusively in the violent period of the California missions. Whereas the annihilation efforts of settler colonialism sought to erase indigenous peoples, their languages, and cultural wisdom, we heretofore acknowledge the indigenous history of this unceded land Cuesta College is a guest on. In so doing, we present a more accurate and truthful understanding of our present moment and future opportunities for healing. This unceded land Cuesta College occupies is essential to all of our well-being and community collaborations. And so, having said that, I think, Orange's novel is so much about Indigenous peoples in California and especially in the Bay Area. Where would you like to start? We do have questions that we can lean on if you want to start there, but I thought it would be nice to give you the opportunity to, have us start wherever you are interested in starting. So any particular places that you would like to begin, or things that are standing out to you or that you would like to discuss?
Question are we going over the second half of the book or in this session, or because I wasn't at the first session, so I
Okay.
wasn't sure.
Yeah, so at this point, anything in the novel is fair game. And is there anyone who hasn't had the chance to complete it? Maybe, will you be offended by plot spoilers if they come up? Okay. The ending is a bit of a doozy, so I feel certain that it's going to come up. But yeah, so anything is fair game at this point. Was there somewhere in particular that you were drawn to?
Well, I mean, I thought the whole book was good, especially in the sense that it really updates the Native American experience. I mean, I know that other Native American authors like Sherman Alexie have touched on urban Native Americans or urban Indians and so on. But I mean, this really gets into it with many different characters and many different, experiences and backgrounds. And in Oakland, and I've been in Oakland, and I can picture some of the areas and so on. So, and I thought it was really great to have that be out there for people, because I still think so many people still idealize Native Americans in certain ways and still picture them with feather headdresses and things like that are, real stereotypical. So, this shows Native Americans who are into rap and into, the urban things that so many other people are into. So I thought that was valuable. As gritty as the book was and as sad in many ways, it was also pretty realistic too. It felt that way anyway.
Yeah, and I see Bruce, you have a response?
A response, or maybe it's just another question, but it does take off from the previous question. The thing that struck me and impressed me about the book, I mean, because I haven't lived that experience, I can't presume that I know what's realistic and what isn't. So I take it on faith that it is, but I can't judge that with any certainty. The thing that struck me was how, in a way, rounded the characters were. That there's certain idealized visions that many of us were taught about Native Americans. There are also some well-known spotlighting of social problems and substance abuse and all those things, which is a counter to that idealized version. What really impressed me about the book was that it gave us all of it. It didn't sugarcoat the problems, or what we would see as the problems, but it also gave us the view of interest in culture, both their culture, the larger, if you want to almost think of it as a diaspora culture as well, and the complexity of some of the characters' aspirations and the intellect that was shown. And frankly, that's not a view that I recall being exposed to so much. So I really appreciated the way these characters were fleshed out, warts and all.
Yeah, I agree. I one of the things that's always struck me about this book is just the large cast of characters. They just run the gamut of personalities and interests and the ways they engage with the world and the ways they engage with their indigeneity. Like, I love that there are characters who feel estranged from that sort of sort of dominant idea of, you know, someone who's familiar with the reservation culture in any given group. And, you know, you have people who feel strange from that, people who are part of that, people who have ties to it, but don't know where they fall, people who are mixed race. Like, I think it's a very dynamic world that he's created. I really appreciate that. And when I've had the opportunity to teach the book, it's something that the students have been struck by, because I think so often they have only seen some of the stereotypical images that, you know, that he that he looks at in the prelude, for instance, right? Like, or the prologue. Yeah.
I found that I had to make a photocopy of that first part of all the characters and make my own little notes on it to keep everybody straight. And this is the second time I've read it, so.
I would say my situation with the book has been that I've either had a very, very challenging time getting anyone to read it. And if they have, most of them refused to finish the book. And the couple who did were almost felt a really strong sense of betrayal that he took the symbolic, traditional, you know, the fact of having a powwow at the end, regardless of what happened there, and blew that all apart. So they felt there was no honoring of anything by him, no honoring of the traditions or the culture, anything. It has been interesting because I'm in 3 book clubs and they tend to be fairly open to what they will read. It was a total negative from all 3 book groups. And so I'm glad to hear that Cuesta, you know, that maybe it's the age of the people in my book clubs. I have no idea. I was not prepared for the astounding negativity I have received about why did you ever pick this book as Cuesta Book of the Year. It's been a real negative.
I mean, that's interesting. I will admit, so the one time I taught this in a class, I had a family emergency and was not able to, I had to have someone cover my final day of class. So I didn't get to talk with the students about the ending. And that was the part I really wanted to hear their responses. And because the first couple times I read this, and even now, I'm not entirely sure what I think of the ending. But then hearing you say that, there were a couple of things that stood out to me as I read this time that I think there's so much happening that the first time even that I read it, I was like, you just can't hold all the details.
No.
But with this one, I picked up on a couple more things. Maybe it's where I am too. I was thinking a lot of history, and I was thinking about how he foregrounds things in his prologue, and he talks about, you know, Sand Creek massacre, with the section in the prologue called Massacre as Prologue. And I was just thinking a lot about history. So there were a couple of lines that, of course, now that I'm looking, I can't find them, where I think it's Opal and Jackie. Opal has some thought about like, did someone actually come here to get us? And then Jackie, when she's walking out, I think it's her, when she's walking out to get Orville, she has this thought of all these people lying on the ground in their regalia. And at first she thinks that this is like performance art. And I wondered about the commentary there of like, so if it is another massacre, if it is another, like an echo or a reverberation of the same kind of violence continuing to happen, continuing to happen. I don't know. I just wondered about maybe there's something there, because I haven't known how to think about or talk about this ending. I don't know. Where are you all with that?
You know, I felt the same way, that this was a massacre, and only it was kind of like brought up to modern times.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like a lot of what we read about in the characters in the book were the, you know, the substance abuse, the loss of family, that kind of thing. are the results of genocide that was practiced on Native Americans. And so the loss of culture, and when you have that, then you get these sorts of results. The other people involved, the drug dealers and so on, I think were of Hispanic or Mexican American backgrounds, but a similar kind of background. And so this is kind of like, this is what you get. Also, one thing, this is a writer, and a good writer, and he's writing a novel. And so it's not, you know, I'm sure there's some autobiographical things to it, but it's also, you know, a novel. And so I think expectations that he's going to portray Native Americans this way, and, you know, and all of that, well, you know, he doesn't want, I don't think, I'm guessing, but I think he doesn't want those restraints, just like any writer. He wants to write what he wants.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think he is making a point here about what has happened, what the result of what has happened after all of these years, after Sand Creek, which really, when you think about it, that wasn't 1619 or, you know, way back, that was a little over, you know, 150 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, I think he's brought it all together in a very modern sense. So anyway.
And Elizabeth, I think I saw your hand go up.
Thanks. Yeah, Kathy, that made me really wonder what it was that they objected to. I mean, for me, it just seemed like, you know, they wanted a big dramatic finish where everyone came together. And where does everyone come together but this type of event, you know, like a powwow. And, you know, it's like this sort of like big culmination. So I guess I'm just interested in what was so triggering for them.
There were varying responses, and I can't answer that for each one. I sort of had the feeling they were, maybe again, you know, chalk it up to the times again, everyone's so stressed out. They were desperate that somehow there was going to be a happy ending to this story. And not only wasn't it happy, it was unhappy in an incredible, you know, in an enormous and horrifying way. And so I thought maybe it was just they're clawing right now for good things, and, you know, wish that people would have resolved their addictions, and somehow at the powwow everything would have come together and there was going to be some sort of kumbaya, you know, at the end. I don't know, but that's sort of what I'm thinking, is this is also awful, and then at the end it ended in the most horrifying way. So why in the world did you tell us to read this book? It was that's my guess, but I didn't go into it deeply with anyone. Most of them didn't even want to talk about it. They really thought it was a horrible experience reading it, if they read it at all.
Thank you for clarifying, Kathy. I feel like I understand more what they may have been feeling.
Yeah, Denise, go ahead.
I was really struck this second reading with Josefina, or Fina, the abuela of Octavio, and I think maybe a great aunt of somebody else. She struggled so hard to pull her family together. And I believe, if I've got all the relationships right, everyone that we know died, kind of the drug guys that tried to pull off the robbery, those are all her family members. So I can only imagine what she's going to be left with after this, the ending.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I've been thinking about with this reading is like Tony. I don't know what I want to do with Tony's character, because he kind of did I guess I was thinking about it as an about face, but maybe I shouldn't have been so surprised. I don't know. It was his character's actions are kind of particularly interesting to me because of you know, like, why do they want him to wear his regalia? Seems like there's got to be some symbolism there. And he's one of those characters who, you know, every time his chapters come up, there's engagement with this idea of appearances and what people see when they look at you and what people see when they look at him specifically. And so I was just thinking about, like, you know, with everything he carries as a character and all the assumptions people make based on what they see when they look at him, then what does it mean that his character was part of this, but then when Optimus Prime on them, and like, I don't know, it was an interesting moment to for that character specifically, who the narration after the prologue opens with, right? He's our first character we see. So I don't know. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on how his character play, or any of them. I mean, there's so many and they all play out in such different ways, right? But yeah, I guess I'm still just trying to unpack all the various meanings embedded in there. Yeah, Elizabeth.
I think I like the movement towards allowing characters to be complex and you know, we don't have like the henchman and the hero so much in a lot of literature. And I feel like part of what the book was doing was expanding our view of different parts of like Indigenous culture and how much variety they can be in experiences and approaches. And I mean, I sort of saw the characters as a way to share that with the reader. And yeah.
I wondered if specifically with Tony, where you talked about being in the regalia and all that, is so much, especially in that first chapter where he's introduced, so much is based on people telling him he looks stupid, or because of his facial features, because of the fetal alcohol syndrome, they make assumptions about him. And he's so acutely aware of it, but he kind of, I mean, he has no choice but to go with that. So I don't know. I was trying to figure out if some of why Tommy Orange had Tony do what Tony did was something connected back with his fetal alcohol syndrome, and look at me, I'm all decked out in all of this regalia. And he always wanted to be recognized as someone other than a guy with fetal alcohol syndrome. If that's all tied together somehow, but I never quite, you know, like everyone was saying, it's so complex, and I had to keep going back and looking up the cast of characters. But I wondered how much was him with his fetal alcohol syndrome, and that part of it, he had him have fetal alcohol syndrome to symbolize that component of the whole way we look at Indigenous people, is they're mostly all alcoholics. So I tried to have some thread that connected all of that, but I didn't fully get there.
Well, and then his last name, Lone Man. I mean, that's got
Oh, right.
bring us
Yes.
something.
Well, and Kathy, you're making me think of, I think it's his second to last chapter. It's the one, for me, it's on 234 to 235. It's the one where he's writing Bart. And he comes across that woman who, he says at the top of 235, that she wants to see if the Indian speaks. It's the next question she means to get to. The face behind the face she makes says it all. And then he responds that they get off at the same exit and invites her to the powwow, kind of like whatever, you know. And he says, he hears that she's responding, but he doesn't listen. People don't want any more than a little story they can bring back home with them to tell their friends and family around the dinner table, to talk about how they saw a real Native American boy on a train, that they still exist. And so he just kind of ignores her, right? So I wonder, I mean, that seems to tie into some of what you're getting at there with
I think that's exactly the line. That's the page where I hadn't marked it, but I think that's where I did start to try to pull all of that together.
Yeah. Yeah. What about any thoughts about other, either more about Tony or about other characters? Oh, Julie, I see you've unmuted yourself.
Well, along with that same thing, I think that that is a combination of, the regalia being identified as Native American, then also the fetal alcohol syndrome, which is another association with more modern Native Americans of alcoholism and so on. So you have that combination right there. And I really think that the author is doing that throughout the whole book.
Mhm.
And we've touched on how he fleshes out these characters to be real human beings, not just sort of, one-dimensional at all.
Yeah.
And so, and they've got the history going. It came up for me during the book, there's been a lot of this stuff in our culture about critical race theory and, not wanting to teach some of the things that our society, our culture has done to African Americans, Native Americans, Asians throughout the years that have been horrible. And because, we don't want to have to hate, what our culture is or something. But, this is, in a way, this is kind of like, you did it, let's be real about it and let's not make the mistake again.
Mhm.
And I think he is really showing here, whether intentionally or not, what some of that background has, some of those things have done to the culture and how the people within that culture are struggling or moving ahead. So.
I mean, you're making me think now too, that like at the end, his actions, which, we're not granted access to his thoughts before he does this, but just sort of in the moment. So I wonder if he's so much about, as a character, if he's so much about what it means to look the stereotype or look multiple stereotypes, then for him to do this quite heroic thing at the very end and to do this maybe unexpected thing, he doesn't fulfill the stereotype that might be expected of like someone who is involved with the drug scene, and who, obviously when people look at him, they see certain things. Like it's, I don't know, you just have me thinking about some, how his character might be functioning in those ways to sort of disrupt certain narratives. So, yeah. And to echo what Denise said in the chat, feel free to put comments in the chat too. Other thoughts about Tony or about other characters? I know last time when we talked, there were so many different characters that various people were drawn to or were having trouble connecting with. And I'd be curious to know, as you've sort of moved forward a bit in the book, where you stand with, are there certain characters who are speaking to you in different ways, or who you're still struggling with, or now you're struggling with this other character, just because this book is so much about character, where are you with them?
I thought it was such a wonderful variety. Here you have one character that has a master's degree. He's writing, he's gone through the educational system. You have characters that are, and I can't remember which one off the top of my head. I had to constantly go back and reference their, bios, so to speak. But that's real computer oriented and computer savvy and so on. And so and then you see the characters coming from, and this is mostly the older generation, the interim ones that are struggling with alcoholism and trying to get well and so on and so forth, coming from other states or from out of the city or urban area. And I really thought he showed a good variety of characters and levels of coping and of expressing being Native Americans or trying to find their culture, you know, and so on. So it was a lot, like you say, a lot to unpack. I had to reference a lot, but I thought it was really, he deserved being, what was he, shortlisted for the Pulitzer on this, or a finalist, I think, or
Mhm.
yeah, and he deserved it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that a lot of people have talked about with this book is the female characters, and how we have especially a lot of strong matriarchs. And we have others who are younger as well. I mean, I think Blue is one of our youngest female characters, at least by the end. Obviously, we have, you know, Opal gives a lot of backstory from when she and Jackie are children as well. But a lot of people talk about the engagement with gender and with women specifically, and any thoughts there? Anything that's standing out to you? I mean, especially with Jackie and Opal and Fina are very interesting figures, I think. I mean, I'll admit, I still don't know what to do with Jackie and Harvey's new amicability.
I was struck. I don't think I got this the first reading, that Blue and Edwin here, they're in, you know, they work together, they're kind of friends. They are at the, you know, they've organized this whole thing. They're the ones that get robbed and all the trauma, and they're a half brother and sister. That I guess I missed that the first time around. So that was another layer of, wow, how weird. And yet they don't quite know it, but there's some, you know, something, some spirit that they're starting to get to know it without.
Now, somehow I missed that the first time around too. And this time I was like, oh, wow, good thing they really like did not try to date each other. But which made that hospital encounter, like the very, you know, the very end, like it just added, it added a lot to that, another layer, right?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. They're all sitting in the hospital and they're all kind of just figuring out, she looks an awful lot like someone I know. And yeah, I think he is my brother, or, you know, and here they are all in a trauma center. They're all traumatized and they're all sitting together, but figuring out that they're related, you know. It was, I don't know, it was quite something. And I mean, it's like something there that I'm not quite getting, but it's along with them that they're just sort of realizing too.
Yeah, part of me, I'm still thinking of, Kathy, what you said with the responses that you've seen, and part of me wants to look at this final grouping in the hospital as if there is optimism in the end of the novel, that this is where it is, right? That there's something about how they've all managed to sort of stumble through their individual challenges and all of the you know, both the hardship and the love, and they've managed to find each other, even if they're not really, like, even if they're just like on the cusp of figuring out exactly what it is they found, right? There's part of me that this time around I'm like, okay, I think maybe it's not feeling like as bleak an ending as the first time I read it. I was like, whoa, that's and this time around I think there's some kind of optimism in there. Yeah, no. I mean, I'll share with you, for what it's worth, I'll share in the chat that there is apparently a sequel looming that, as of last June, was slated for release later this year. So I don't know if that's still a potential release date, but it's interesting if you want to read about it. It's quite a lengthy article. And, you know, Orange talks about how it's different and how it's similar. And I guess it picks up in the immediate aftermath of the powwow. So, you know, I don't know much about it besides that, but for what it's worth. Well, I will say too, coming out of that article, one of the things he talks about with the sequel is he says that it comes out of historical research that he'd been doing on Indian boarding schools. And he's particularly interested in Pratt, who's one of the founding figures of the boarding schools. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's good. Yeah, maybe I will. But I think that's part of why I was thinking more about history as I was reading this time around, because I was thinking like, okay, if his sequel is really a lot about history, and he talks about how this text is actually really engaged with history as well. And the first time I read it, I think I was thinking like it's very engaged with pop culture and representation and stereotypes and all of that, that sort of those entangled issues. But I wasn't thinking so much of history, right? Like, you know, he talks about Sand Creek Massacre and how he does some stuff with that, and in this book. And so I think I was thinking like, what's so contemporary? I'm thinking gentrification. I'm thinking media stereotypes. So I don't know. It made me think about that, and so I guess I just have history on the brain and was wondering. I mean, I'm wondering how you're seeing that come out in the novel, even if it is some of that stuff, like, you know, the title itself harkens back to, you know, he references specifically Gertrude Stein at one point and Radiohead. And I was thinking about, you know, the histories there too, especially with the Stein and like gentrification and what it means for what you remember to not be there anymore. And so I don't know, I'm curious what you're seeing about history in this text, or the ways you're seeing Orange engage with different types of history in this text. Or pop culture.
The prologue, sure, he certainly emphasizes the whole being of pop culture and the internet, and he keeps almost everything lines up with how it's affected by social media and the internet. And when I first read that, I expected the whole book to have more of a connection to that, like he would stay on that track all the way through the book with how everything that was happening in this story was caused or affected so strongly by pop culture. But it didn't really seem to me, unless there were things that just slipped by me that I didn't connect with, that what I was expecting a little bit was for him to keep tying those things together. And I didn't feel that he did really that much, but again, there may have been symbolism that I didn't pick up on or didn't understand there. But it certainly was powerful in the prologue about the effect that social media was having on every one of the characters you're going to meet.
I just happened to flip to this page by accident. It would be page 156, 157, unnumbered, but it's the start of part 3, the return, and the quote from James Baldwin is, "People are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them."
You mentioned the technology and the modern, and I thought there was one scene that came to mind, and I don't remember the name of the Native American guy who was the janitor in the Coliseum where the powwow took place. And you have the one guy who's operating the drone who's flying it over, and say he's really technologically, he knows what he's doing, and he's kind of, way more advanced than me. And the janitors, trying to hit at it with a broom and so on. And I really felt like it sort of flashed that, here you had Native Americans fighting against the onslaught of the Europeans moving west. And to me, this was a little bit of a, you have someone from, the old guard fighting against, or not fighting, but, coming up against this technology. And yet some of the younger Native Americans have embraced this technology and are using it themselves. So it's an interesting mix to me of all of that.
Well, and that moment's so interesting because I think that was Bill, and he's a veteran of conflict in Vietnam, right? And so he brings that background, and then that makes me think of how they 3D print the guns. And it's the same kid who's doing the drone, right? So like the ways technology is employed, and then the ways that, like, there are some instances, like with Dean, who's doing his film project, he uses a really specific technology. It's a camera that is older, and it's his uncle's camera. So there's like a connection to it. So I don't know, I'm thinking of like the ways different technologies are getting used then. And the ways they show up, because isn't it when Opal and Jackie sneak out of Ronald's, or whack Ronald and then leave his place, when they're leaving in the middle of the night, isn't the on the TV, it's showing the Indian head that he opens the prologue with, right? That's what's on
The test pattern.
Yeah. So there's something, I'm thinking of like the multifarious ways in which technology is being contended with. And when it's new technology, when it's the TV, because there's lots of reflections of people and seeing themselves in the TV. Orville teaches himself to dance through YouTube, right? So, and Edwin connects with Harvey over Facebook, pretending to be his mom. So there's I don't know, it's interesting because it's sometimes connective and sometimes disruptive, right? Or harmful. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, did you all have other thoughts about the technologies? And because I think you're right, like I expected more about social media, which I did not necessarily get, but I got other technologies, like a variety of them. A lot of which are technologies interested in looking at or being looked at, like with the drone and with the cameras and with YouTube, right? There's like watching, there's something about watching. Well, I wonder then, oh yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
Well, this isn't really answering your question, but I took the pause as an opportunity because I was kind of leafing back. I've got the book on my phone, and then I was that's why I was looking down at it. I was leafing back because I was still trying to figure out whether, especially the drug dealers and the people who were behind the attack or the robbery of the powwow were in fact Native American or Mexican or indigenous Mexican, and I couldn't really. So as you know, it's hard to keep track of the whole cast of characters, and I still am not sure. But I was looking back at the first chapter when Octavio is introduced, and there is still some hint that he's got some Indian or Native American connection, but it's not really explicit. It's not as explicit as the others. But I think that that question, which is unresolved in my mind, somehow would set up how one would read or interpret the attack on the powwow. Because there's a part of me that is trying to see that as kind of the counter to the people who are very curious about their culture, as opposed to maybe resentful that they have this culture as a kind of baggage and are in a sense attacking it, almost turning their sense of their own self on this symbol of that culture and its traditions. So I mean, that could be a completely bogus interpretation, but almost like a kind of self-loathing turned outward. So I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know whether there's any validity to it.
I mean, it makes me wonder about the role that poverty plays in the text, because it's kind of constantly there. And since the whole impetus for this event at the powwow is to get the money, because there's like what, $50,000 worth of not cash but Visa gift cards, right? Like and I don't know, so now, I mean, you said that, and I'm thinking about like, well, if we have this Gertrude Stein idea and the title is in some ways about gentrification, and then it's also about disenfranchisement and termination era policies, and then it's about this money, and this is why there are like, why drugs feature, like we have so many families where like, you know, I didn't want to go this way, but then like we needed money, and what good is college debt gonna do me when like mom needs money now, right? Like, I don't know, now you just have me thinking about that, like about poverty and the role that that plays, and what sort of commentary the book might be giving in that direction. And of course I have no answer, I'm just now pondering this.
I thought Octavio and that group were more like gang members and operating like a gang. I also felt anytime, well, most Mexican Americans or Hispanics are a combination of Native American, Native Central American, and so they've got their own Native American culture that they may have lost along the way as well. And you know, to me, it was all about the money, not about culture, not about loss of culture. You know, they're in their own culture of gangsterism, so to speak. And so that was about that for them. You know, kind of the use of the powwow. Powwows for Native Americans are a gathering place for, you know, pride of Native American culture, of arts, of drumming, and you know, just food and all of the positive, supposedly positive things. No alcohol allowed, that kind of thing. And so, you know, that it gets kind of blown apart. And then this is a big one. There are smaller powwows and big powwows. This was supposed to be a really big powwow, you know, and so you know, I think that the ending was, there was a little bit of a statement there of, and I'm not sure exactly how he meant it, but of blowing that positivity about that there's something that is there to spark and blow it up at a, you know, a moment's notice or something.
And Therese, did I see that you had, I think you had unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I've only gotten halfway through the book. But
You're very quiet.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Any better?
I'm just gonna turn my volume all the way up.
Sorry, what I was gonna say was that I'm only partway through the book, but I'm listening to the audio of the book as well as following along in the book. That kind of seems to help, but I thought it was really sad that the boys didn't even have enough money, that they thought they were gonna have enough money to buy tacos at the powwow, that they had to go around and steal all the money out of all the fountains everywhere in order to get enough money to even buy something to eat.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there seems to be a commentary, as much of a commentary around poverty as around youth, then in some ways, because I think, because those boys, yeah, that's a good point. Maybe something about the intergenerational nature of this, which then points to what we've been talking about then with you know, the larger histories of genocide and removal, and you know, back to when we were talking about massacres, and yeah, it seems to be, well, and even then what you were saying, Julie, with different cultures, because then I'm thinking about how, so you know, our key players there are all native, whether partially or fully, right? Like Octavio and Daniel, who flies the drones, and Calvin and his cousins, and right, they are all native characters, but some of them are mixed race as well. But then it makes me think about with California and the way that the genocide against Native peoples has worked historically in California. There's also been a long history of Indigenous peoples concealing recognizably Indigenous names, especially during the mission era, because it was dangerous to have a name that was recognizably Indigenous. And so then a lot of people either took on or through marriage, you know, whether through marriage or other means, Spanish surnames. So I don't know. Yeah, I feel like his cultural commentary is very far reaching and broad, without being, you know, broad in like that it hits on a number of issues, not like that it's, you know, sloppy or something. Like he seems to be bringing in a whole lot with all these characters, right? I mean, I wonder too then, you know, one of the things that we started talking about, I think it was the last time, and I'm curious what you think of it now, wherever you are in the text. Storytelling is really central in this novel, and storytelling in a variety of ways, whether it's the stories people tell about themselves, or whether it's through, you know, like Dean with his camera, or you know, whatever it is, right? And then just telling stories about the past, telling histories, telling personal stories. So I'm just wondering how you're, you know, how you're seeing different characters engage with storytelling, or just how you see the novel in general. I mean, you know, whether it's the form or the themes, or, you know, what do you think the role of stories is, or how do you see Orange engaging with stories and storytelling here?
I think, yeah, it's obviously there, and I mean, he specifically uses the term several times throughout the book, but it is symbolically there as well. I think it's part of what made me have to go back and keep reading chapters to feel like I understood why he wrote that chapter. What is this all about? And some of it is the storytelling. And I started to wonder if one character who told some specific story, if he had one of the other characters tell the same story, what would, even if not a like reading out of a book story, but tell this incident, how it would have made the book more confusing or made it easier to get that essence of this is a lot about storytelling. Again, I didn't, it's a book that I feel like I don't have any endings for, that I need every time I go back and reread some of the chapters, I get something a little different out of it. So, and that's storytelling also, how, you know, you're interpreting, and I got a little carried away with, oh, this is symbolism for this, and this is really referring to this. And I finally thought, let some of that go, that I'm doing that too much. I'm putting too much into the storytelling, but, and that's a huge part of the stereotype of their culture too, is everything's based on these ancient stories too. So I wondered if that's why he made that such a powerful component of this book.
And Bruce,
Then there's also the story of each of these characters and how they intertwine. And one thing that seems to come up with many of them is, you know, I think I'm Native, or my dad said we're Native, but we never talked about it. Or I know this a little bit, or, you know, I have this tidbit on, you know, I heard about this, but the stories are not complete. They're not long ranging in terms of going back in time, like a genealogy. And, you know, that is so hard to trace Native heritage on a linear basis. So that seems to be floating.
and Bruce, you have your hand up.
Yeah, well, I was thinking in response to your question that your question is both particular to this book, but it's also a much broader question that could be asked of literature. And you could ask that question from the standpoint of the author and what story the author is trying to tell. And in this case, perhaps trying to claim or take control of a certain narrative that is often written by others about them. But I'm also considering the question from the standpoint of the reader. And from the reader perspective, literature, maybe not all literature, but let's say for the sake of argument, all literature functions as both a window and a mirror. And so, you know, we get a window into what somebody chooses to present to us about another culture, but at the same time, what we make of that story is a mirror where we, if we think about it, can look at ourselves and unpack it from that side. So I think it's a very interesting question. I think that's one of the things I appreciated about this book, is that it seems to do all of those things from both the narrator's side and the reader's side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to be mindful of time. I know we have about 2 minutes left. And Denise, you had mentioned that you wanted to maybe screen share something.
Yeah, I might just screen share the library events page that has the ticket stuff in that. But yeah, make any wrapping up comments you want, and then we can do that last.
Well, are there any wrapping up comments you all want? I've just enjoyed talking about this book with you all and hearing your perspectives on it. And, you know, you've opened a lot of windows for my thoughts. So I, you know, thank you for being here and for showing up in all the ways. Any last comments about the text before?
Just this has no significance to anything probably, but it's interesting that when I listened to that interview with him, and I think that was maybe about 4 months ago, he was living in Oakland at that time. And I just recently, something came up about him, something that somehow I got flagged in, that he now lives in Angels Camp. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And maybe he has 2 homes, and it was one, I don't know. But I thought it's kind of interesting that since he seemed to definitely be still immersed in Oakland at the time of this interview, and talked a lot about the state of being of the city of Oakland now, as if he's there on a daily basis. So it was just that thing I read. I thought, well, this is interesting. I wonder if I'd be allowed to ask him, why did you move to Angels Camp, which is such an interesting place in itself, but maybe that's where he goes to write. I really don't know. It's just something that just flashed up like within the last week that I saw that he has moved to Angels Camp.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to ask him. Location is it seems so central to this text, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so his location, I imagine, would influence that in ways, but that's interesting. I was not aware of that.
Well, I think we've got a couple questions for him when he shows up. Tell us about the sequel and where do you live and why?
Yeah.
It can only be nosy, right? Okay, well, I just want to thank Anne so much for facilitating, and thanks to you guys for coming, and hopefully you don't have power outages today. I guess the Cuesta campus has been evacuated and everything's canceled for the day. So I'm just going to do one quick screen share. And this is just to show you our Cuesta library events page. So here we were today with our book group. We also have a free film that you can access. You just need to sign up to get the access code. Friday, we have a question and answer session and an introduction to the film with Zach McKiernan. And then one other thing is we have a poetry reading tomorrow. We'll be focusing on Native American poetry. And there's no sign up, just go straight to the Zoom. And that's all on this library events page. And I will stop screen sharing and I'll put that in the chat.
That movie was really good.
And any questions, just let me know. Oops, I didn't get that, did I? Well, it should be cuesta.edu, not ESTA. But just
And I heard
email me.
I heard
you have a
Therese say
question.
that movie was really good. So
I just watched it yesterday, so
okay.
okay, just let me know if you have questions about the tickets or anything else. So, all righty. Well, I think it's time for lunch. Thanks so much.